Hey, welcome everybody. This is our third round of going through the Tanya. This is round number three, and really there's no end of Tanya. We learn it our whole lives, as we will see. Let me just back up. Let me give a overall description. Let me spend this class really giving an overall description of what Tanya is, what it is, what it's not, who it's for, who it's not for, etc. And And this way, you'll see if this is something that you're interested in doing and interested in continuing. This is learning Tanya is not like any learning any other safer at all, in the sense that we're not learning something. Usually, when you learn a safer, you learn it, you try to internalize it, and then you move on to something else. But the Tanya is so much more than that. It really is a journey, a journey of a lifetime that takes a lifetime. There's no finish line. So let me start from the very beginning, and sort of the context in which the Alter Rebbe brought Tanya into the world. This is in the late 1700s when the Tanya was published, around the founding of America. And let me give a little bit of the context of that time and what the Alter Rebbe was striving to accomplish, and how the unique path that the Alter Rebbe brought into the world in terms of Avodas Hashem. So really, the Tanya, as I said, is a journey that ultimately is a journey of our entire lives. And what the Alter Rebbe is striving to do is empower us to really become the best versions of ourselves. That every one of us is born with incredible potential, spiritual potential. But for many of us, and for most of us, we don't actualize that potential. Even if we are on the path of Torah and mitzvahs, etc., there lies underneath the surface of all of us incredible spiritual, emotional, psychological strengths, abilities, powers that we normally don't access, and we normally don't bring to fruition. And the Tanya really teaches us how to do that and how to become everything that we are meant to become. At the welcome, Farah, welcome. At the at the Akedah, at Akedas Yitzchak, right before Avram is about to shech Yitzchak, Hashem, or the Malach, calls out to him, Avraham, Avraham. And what is the two times Avraham? And so the commentaries explain that there was a picture of Avraham in Shemayim as he fulfilled all of his potential on earth. And then there's the Avraham Lamata down here. And at that moment of the Akedah, the Avraham Lamata was completely congruent with the Avraham Elamayla. In other words, that's the Avraham. The Avraham down below has reached all of his potential and matches the vision of the Avraham in the picture of Avraham in Gan Eden. And really, it's the same thing with every one of us, that before we are born, there is a vision, a picture of us as we have fulfilled all of our potentials here in Olam Hazeh. And so there's a picture of us that at the end of our limited journey here in Olam Hazeh, what we are meant to look like. And then there is the us here. And our job is to, like Avram Avinu, to make those two pictures congruent, to make them parallel. In fact, the Baal Shem Tov, I've mentioned this before, the Baal Shem Tov's definition of Gehenna. Like, we tend to think of Gehenna as some kind of celestial barbecue, but says the Baal Shem Tov, that's not what it is. Says the Baal Shem Tov, you know what Gehenna is? Gehenna is that at the moment of Yetzias HaNeshama, at the moment the soul leaves the body, it is shown a vision of everything that it was supposed to be and what it is now. And the gap between those two is Gehenna. The feeling that the soul feels of everything that he or she was meant to be and what he or she is, that the pain of that gap is Gehenna, says the Baal Shem Tov. So our job is to close that gap, to reach our potential. And the Alter Rebbe gives us a very unique path on how to do that, on how to reach our potential in every area of life, in our potential vis-a-vis our relationships with Hashem, our Avodas Hashem, and vis-a-vis ourselves. And this was and the Alter Rebbe gave this was novel and unique, and in fact controversial at the time when the Alter Rebbe published Tanya. And there were many that were opposed to the Derech of Tanya, because the prevailing movement at that time was the Musar movement, and still is. And the Musar movement basically gave the path to self-perfection. And the ideal was to reach that state of self-perfection. And anything less than that was spiritual failure. And so you had to keep striving and trying to reach that stage of spiritual perfection. Comes the Alter Rebbe. And so, now the problem with setting a goal of spiritual perfection is that it is an unobtainable goal for so many of us. And so the result of setting a spiritual goal of inner spiritual perfection, where the inner and outer are totally aligned, the problem with setting a goal that we cannot reach is we either become dejected and give up on that goal, or we become deluded and fool ourselves that we're fulfilling that goal. Both of those, neither are positive or productive. So comes the Alter Rebbe and says, that's not the goal, which in and of itself was tremendously controversial. What do you mean that's not the goal? What do you mean the goal isn't to become the tzaddik, the perfect Jew? How could that not be the goal? That's the epitome. That's the finish line. That's what we're all supposed to strive to reach. And says the Alter Rebbe, no, that is not the goal. Not only is it not the goal, but even deeper than that, the Alter Rebbe says, it's an impossibility for the vast majority of us to even reach spiritual perfection. In fact, we weren't created to reach spiritual perfection. So, and this was tremendously controversial at the time, and many people were opposed to this, but the Alter Rebbe said, no, the goal of to reach spiritual perfection is in the purvey of the tzaddik alone. And the tzaddikim are only a handful. We cannot become tzaddikim. We weren't created to be tzaddikim. And the Alter Rebbe spends a tremendous amount of time defining these various terms. But the Alter Rebbe says that our goal is not spiritual perfection. Our goal is basically behavior control. Behavior control. And behavior control means our thoughts, our speech, and our actions. And when we learn how to control all three of those so that they do not control us, for many of us, our thoughts, our actions, our speech, they control us. We don't control it. And the Alter Rebbe taught us a very systematic method in which we can actually take over control over our thought, speech, and action, so that we don't do things or say things that we regret later because we're in full control. And the Alter Rebbe explains that what that means is that the inner battle, the inner turmoil that we all go through, our negative inclinations that we're all created with, remain with us forever. Spiritual perfection is to completely eliminate any inner turmoil at all, any anger, any jealousy, any taiva, any of the negative qualities that are all part of our nature that we all battle. Spiritual perfection means eliminate them entirely. And the Alter Rebbe says, not only are we unable to eliminate them entirely, we weren't even created for that. that inner battle, that inner turmoil is going to be constant for the rest of our lives. And in fact, we were created for that inner battle. What we are able to do is not allow that inner negativity to manifest itself outwards, not in our actions, not in our speech, and not even in our thoughts. How do we do that? And the Alter Rebbe, it gives us 53 chapters of a methodology on how to do that. And let me just give a summary of sort of sum it all up so we have the big picture before we actually, we have the forest before we actually delve into the trees. So what the Alter Rebbe posits is as follows, that within every single one of us, there exists two energies, two souls. We tend to think we have one soul, we have soul and body. But says the Alter Rebbe, no, we actually have two souls. On one hand, we have an animalistic soul, the Alter Rebbe calls it, a nefesh habahamis. And this animalistic soul, this nefesh habahamis, this is what gives us our energy. This is our life force. This is what energizes us, motivates us, and this is the forefront of our consciousness. And the animal soul is comprised of a duality. On one hand, the animal soul is primarily concerned with the physical body of the person and what the physical body needs and what the physical body enjoys. And like every animal, it primarily is focused on self, on satiating the self. And this is this is what's in the forefront of our consciousness. And then we have buried, embedded in that animal soul, a godly soul, a completely separate soul that is pure godliness, that yearns for transcendence and connection and purpose, and yearns to be absorbed back into its original source. So that means within every one of us, we have this inner tension where we have a godly side, where we feel godly, we feel connected, we feel inspired when we're in tune with it. And that godly soul yearns for one thing, to fulfill the purpose of why we're here, to connect to Hashem through learning His Torah, through doing His mitzvahs, through davening, through inspiration, to connect and be absorbed and to be one with my Creator. That's what the godly soul wants. Spiritual transcendence, to leave the prison of the physical body and ultimately connect to Hashem. But while it's in the physical body, to fulfill Hashem's will here in this world. And then the animal soul that yearns for pleasure, ease, comfort, food, drink, and whatever brings the body pleasure. So we have these two consciousnesses, these two souls that are in a constant state of tension because each one has a mandate. And that mandate is control the body. Each one wants domain over our body. Most of us are born with the default setting that our animal soul has control. Our animalistic consciousness has control and is in the forefront of my mind. And again, the animalistic consciousness isn't negative per se. It certainly has selfish and negative elements to it. But another way of saying the animal soul is think of your nature, like the nature that you were born with. Most of us have elements of our nature that are good, that are kind, that are generous, that are giving. That's all part of our animal soul as well. So our animal soul is comprised, it's a mixture of the good parts of our nature and the selfish, egocentric parts of our nature. There is a fascinating essay written by the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, and it's called Kuntras HaAveda, and it's basically a perush on the Tanya. And the Rebbe Rashav, Reb Shalom Dober, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, explains how how to actually engage in Avodas HaTefillah and how to actualize the Alter Rebbe's path, which we're going to talk about in a second. And he writes there that the vast majority of us, he goes way sort of behind the scenes, and he says the vast majority of us have been, this is not our first rodeo. This is not our first round in Eilam Hazeh. That the vast majority of us are what's called neshamas yeshenas, old souls. We've been here many times before. This is our final incarnation, hopefully. But we've been reincarnated multiple times. And the reason why we've been reincarnated is because we have a task, we have a mission. Every one of us was born with a mission, with multiple missions, multiple purposes. One of those purposes that we're all born with is we're all given an animal soul, tailor-made for us, that we are meant to refine and elevate. And from being its selfish, egocentric, animalistic energy to making it aligned and parallel with your godly energy. And the reason why we continue to come back is because there's elements of our animal soul that we haven't yet refined. And if we don't refine, and once we refine it all, then we've finished our mission. If we're back here again, that's a sign that there's an element of my animal soul that still needs refining. And how do I know which element that is? Well, it's actually easy to know which elements we battle with the most. If I have anger issues, if I have jealousy issues, if I have taiva issues, if I have lashon hara issues, whatever my particular, all of us are unique in that sense. We all have our own individual issues because we all have our own individual nefesh bahamas that we have to elevate. So if I don't have any issues with anger, and that is not my battle, that means I've refined that in a previous incarnation. So I'm not battling with it in this world. What I'm battling with is, whatever it may be, X, Y, Z, and that is my particular mission. So the question is, for most of us, I'm saying in the world of Shomer Torah and mitzvahs, we fulfill the mitzvahs and we learn the Torah, but rarely do we engage in real self-transformation, real inner change and inner work. And this is where the Alter Rebbe's path comes in, because the Alter Rebbe says that in order to really refine your animal soul and have it reach its state of perfection as much as it's capable of, it is going to take tremendous work. You're going to have to be willing to put in the work in Avodas Hashem, but the reward of that work is immeasurable. It's life-changing. If you actually do the work, it's life-changing. It is transformational. Even just learning the concepts, even if you're not putting in the work, just learning the concepts is already transformational of what we have to do to elevate and refine and rectify this animal soul that I'm carrying through life. So in the Alter Rebbe's path, the Alter Rebbe, and this was unique even amongst Hasidim, because the vast majority of the other Hasidic groups served Hashem in a method called what's known as Chagas. Chagas is Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, the emotions. And it's basically utilizing your emotions to serve Hashem. But the Alter Rebbe's path was not that path. The Alter Rebbe's path was Chabad, which is how Chabad got its name. Chabad is an acronym for Chachma, Bina, and Das, the three stages of the intellect. And the Alter Rebbe's entire path, unique amongst even the other Hasidic groups, was a totally intellectual path, meaning that the human mind, the human brain, is capable of incredible strengths, abilities, powers, etc., and is incapable of incredible transformation, transforming ourselves. But most of us don't access our minds and don't utilize our minds in that manner. We don't utilize our minds in transforming ourselves. And so the Alter Rebbe teaches a very systematic methodology on how to utilize our intellect to transform our emotions. And when we utilize the intellect to create or transform the emotions, when we change the way we think, we transform and change the way we feel, which in turn transforms and changes the way that we think, with the way that we speak, and the way that we act. And so in the Alter Rebbe's path, it all begins here. It all begins utilizing the power of our minds. And this was an incredibly unique path and method that the Alter Rebbe brought to the world. Is Tanya for everyone? I'm going to be honest. And the answer is yes and no. And what do I mean by that? Typical rabbi answer. But what do I mean by that? Yes, in the sense that every single Jew is meant to learn the Tanya. This is not a Lubavitch Torah. This is Torah, period. And the method of Tanya is applicable for every single Jew, for every single one of us. And it's one of the things that is so beautiful about Tanya. And we'll see if you hang in on the journey and you go and you carry through with it, you'll see the Alter Rebbe speaks to every single one of us at every level we are at. You don't have to be at a high level, spiritual level, knowledgeable level to be able to apply or learn Tanya. To the contrary, it's for every single person. And every single person, from the most learned person to the most unlearned person, can learn Tanya and take from it at his or her level. So in one sense, yes, it's for everyone. So why do I say yes and no? The no is because there's a story in the Gemara, Rabbi Shiur ben Chananya, and he comes to a crossroads, and he needs to get to the town. And there's a child at the crossroads. And he asks the child, which path will take me to the town? And the child says, well, there's the short, long way and the long, short way. Which way do you want? So Tanya says, I'll take the short, long way. It starts with short. That sounds better. So he takes the short, long way, and it's short. He gets to the town very quickly, but he can't get into the town because it's blocked by a massive wall. He can't get in. So he has to go all the way back now. And he tells the child, I can't get in. The child says, yeah, that's why it's the short, long way. It's shorter, but it's longer because you can't get in. It doesn't actually reach there. It doesn't actually go there. Take the longer, shorter way. And he goes the longer, shorter way. It's much longer and windy path, but he eventually gets there. So on one hand, it's longer, but on the other hand, it's shorter because he actually gets there. So this is a parable to our Avodas Hashem. There's the short, long way where you have segulas, you have things like say a mantra, tie a red string around your wrist, whatever it is, and these will help you in your Avodas Hashem. And the Alter Rebbe's path is, in the Alter Rebbe's ideology, those are the short, long ways. They're short, they're easy, they don't take effort, they don't take toil, they don't burden us, but we never actually get there. So it ends up being the short, long way. The Tanya, the path of Tanya, is not an easy path. If a person is looking for shortcuts, if a person is looking for easy, quick, snap of the fingers, segulas that will bring me to spiritual ecstasy and will bring me to reach my greatest potential, if I'm looking for a shortcut, the Tanya is not for that person. There's no shortcuts. It's like literally everything else in life. Everything worthwhile in life takes effort and toil and work and yigia. But in the end, if you're willing to put in the work, the reward that comes at the end, the knowledge, the Avodas Hashem, the self-transformation is absolutely life-changing. So Tanya gives us the path, but it's a long path. And most people don't make it all the way through because it's arduous. It takes effort. And it's a lot of learning of new concepts. In fact, the first 12 chapters of Tanya, the first 12 chapters out of 53, so that's a good sort of section of the Sefer, is just giving us the building blocks of knowledge. And then once we have those building blocks of knowledge, it's really chapters 13 and on where the Alter Rebbe now begins to teach us, what is the Avodah? What do I need to do with all of this knowledge? How do I utilize this to transform myself? And basically, in the Alter Rebbe's path, the Alter Rebbe teaches us, we have this, as I said, we have this inner turmoil within us. And for most of us, our default setting is our animal soul is the forefront of our consciousness. That's what's motivating me on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute basis. And embedded somewhere deep within is that godly soul. And what the Alter Rebbe's path attempts to do is to switch, make a switch, a paradigm shift, if you will, so that our default setting becomes our godly consciousness. And our animal consciousness becomes weakened. Because as the Alter Rebbe explains, the animal soul and the godly soul have this sort of yin-yang, zigzag, Rome-Israel relationship, zet kam v'zet neifel. The stronger one is, the weaker the other one becomes within us. And the weaker the other one becomes, the stronger the other one becomes. So the stronger our animal soul and our animal consciousness is, the more dormant our godly soul becomes. The stronger our godly soul becomes, the more dormant and weaker our animal consciousness becomes. And then we're able to switch that default setting. So imagine we go through life with our godly consciousness in the forefront of our mind instead of being buried within us. Everything will change. Our relationships with God will change. Our relationships with our fellow humans will change. Our relationships with ourself will change. How we view everything changes and becomes more elevated, more godly, more spiritual, more loving, more sensitive, more kind, more generous. It's because we're looking at things through godly lenses. We're all able to achieve that. The thing with the Tanya is, if every single person is able to achieve its goals, the Alter Rebbe lays out a methodology that every one of us can achieve. This is not just for the spiritual giants. Every one of us, and the Alter Rebbe speaks throughout Tanya and gives us the path and gives us the methods. And the Alter Rebbe says, if you're on a higher elevated state, here's one method. If you're on a little bit of a lower state, here's another method. And if you're on the lowest possible state, here's a method for you. So the Alter Rebbe talks to every one of us. But it's like anything else. It doesn't happen overnight. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's like going to the gym. It's like if I want to lose 30 pounds, I can't do it overnight. If I want to bench press a certain amount of weight, I can't do it overnight. I have to work at it. I have to practice. I have to put in the effort. But if I do that, the Alter Rebbe teaches us how to utilize our mind to actually create or reveal within us real Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And then when we live with that Ava and Yira, when we actually are able to live with that, not just as sort of abstract ideals, but actually we live with that consciousness, everything changes. Our behavior changes. Now, we still may battle those inner battles. As I said in the beginning, we're never going to get rid of those inner battles. The anger that I have, the jealousy that I have, the taivas that I have, whatever my particular battle is, will still rage within me till my last breath. But what I am able to control, utilizing the power of my mind and utilizing the mind to create those emotions of Ava and Yira, what I'm able to control is having that negativity not manifest itself outwardly, externally. So that externally, my thoughts, my speech, my actions are all aligned with my purpose. That's what we're meant to get by the end of Tanya. So that I'm a living, walking, breathing example of the best version of myself, of that image of me as it exists in Gan Eden. to make the two visions, me up there and me down here, totally congruent. That every one of us has the ability to get there. But it's going to take effort, it's going to take work, and we have to be willing to put in that work. But if we can, this will be life-changing. I want to just conclude today with I want to learn together with you, if you open up the books, if you want to open up the books, the very preface of Tanya, it looks like this. It's on page 27 in the Roman numbers, if I'm reading my Roman numbers right. If I remember my Roman numbers from elementary school. XVII, is that 27? I think so, right? Okay. So it's just the first paragraph here. You see in the English, it just translates the first top paragraph, where the Alter Rebbe writes what this entire Sefer is about. And the Alter Rebbe writes as follows: Sefer Lakuti Amorim. That was the name that the Alter Rebbe gave Tanya. Lakuti Amorim, which really means a gathering of teachings. And that's what Tanya was, that's in the Alter Rebbe's mind what Tanya was called. But Tanya has another name also. Chelik Rishon, this is the first section of it. Hanikra b'shem Sefer Shel Beinanim. This is the book of the Beinanim. What is the Beinanim? So the Beinanim, in the Talmud says there's three categories of Jew: the righteous, the intermediary, the intermediate, and the wicked. The tzaddik, the Beinani, and the Rasha. Right? Rasha Tevis, that's the acronym. Tzibor, the congregation of Jews. Tzaddik, Beinani, and Rasha. Tzibor. So the tzaddik, we all know who the tzaddik is. The tzaddik is those Jews who are perfect, who've reached perfect spiritual perfection. Don't sin, don't think anything negative, don't speak negative, etc. We know who the Rasha is, the wicked person, who is given completely over to his animalistic consciousness. Who's the Beinani? So in Talmudic parlance, the Beinani is the middle person. Half sins, half mitzvahs. Like most of us, some sins, some mitzvahs, we're in the middle. The Alter Rebbe says that's not literal, that's figurative. In fact, the Beinani is very similar to the tzaddik. It's not like tzaddik, Beinani, Rasha. It's more like tzaddik, Beinani, Rasha. The Beinani is right next to the tzaddik. He's very similar. In fact, if you, from an external point of view, if you look at the tzaddik and look at the Beinani and watch their behaviors, they're exactly the same. Exactly. The Beinani doesn't sin, just like the tzaddik doesn't sin. The Alter was going to bring an example where in the Gemara, Rava was teaching this Talmud about the tzaddik, Beinani, and Rasha, and Rava, who is one of the great Amoraim of the Talmud, Rava, about who it says, he never stopped learning to such an extent the Malach HaMavos couldn't take him because he was constantly learning. And if you're learning Torah, the Malach HaMavos can't take you. And Rava never stopped learning Torah. And yet, when Rava described him, when Rava was teaching these three categories to his students, he said, if you want a physical example, Kagain ana Beinani. Rava says, I'm a Beinani. And Abaye, who was a student, said, if you're a Beinani, where does that leave all of us? You don't allow any of us to live. If you're the Beinani, then we're all Rishayim. So obviously Rava was a tzaddik, but how could Rava even make that mistake? You can't say, well, maybe Rava was just being humble because he's teaching Torah. He has to teach them the emes. So he be'emes thought he was a Beinani. The answer is because the Beinani and the tzaddik look very similar. The Beinani doesn't sin either. The difference between the Beinani and the tzaddik is what's going on inside. The tzaddik has completely vanquished his animal soul, his animalistic consciousness. It no longer exists anymore. He no longer battles with taiva, anger, gaiva, whatever it is, ego, selfishness. He doesn't battle. Tzaddik doesn't battle. The Beinani, which is all of us, what we're striving to reach, the Beinani is constantly battling. He never eliminates, or she never eliminates, that animalistic consciousness from within. The Beinani is just able to engage in behavior control through the Alter Rebbe's method of utilizing our mind to actually create or reveal the emotions of Ava and Yira, and that manifests and transforms our behavior. So the Alter Rebbe says this Sefer, these 52 chapters, it's not for the tzaddik. It's not for the tzaddik. He has his own Aveda. In fact, the Alter Rebbe, I mentioned this last time we were learning, the Alter Rebbe wrote a book, Sefer Shel Tzadikim, the Aveda for tzaddikim. Now, that would be fascinating to learn that sefer. But that sefer was burned in a fire in the Alter Rebbe's home. And the Alter Rebbe took that as a sign that it wasn't meant to be published in this world and never reprinted it or published it. And so it was lost. So we don't have the Sefer Shel Tzadikim. So, and perhaps it's for the best because maybe somebody will think, well, I should be learning Sefer Shel Tzadikim. But the reality is this is Sefer Shel Beinanim. The Beinani is the struggling Jew. How the struggling Jew, which is all of us, how the struggling Jew reaches their potential. They'll still struggle, but their external behavior will have reached its absolute potential. So that's why this book is called Sefer Shel Beinanim. And that's what the Alter Rebbe called it. Likutei Amorim are Sefer Shel Beinanim. It began to be called Tanya because the very first word of the book is Tanya. And so it just began to be called by that name because that was the first word of the book. Even in the Alter Rebbe's lifetime, the Alter Rebbe's Hasidim were calling it Tanya. And that's how we know it today as Tanya. But it was taught. That's what it means. It was taught. It's part of a quote. Tanya b'sei Perek Gimel Nida. It was taught in the third chapter of Masechtas Nida. That's how the Alter Rebbe starts. Okay, but let's take a look at this first paragraph because it gives us, and we'll conclude here. It gives us tremendous insight into what the Alter Rebbe wanted with this sefer. And one of the reasons why the Alter Rebbe wrote this sefer is that people were coming to him constantly for advice in Avodas Hashem. And his Hasidim, as the Alter Rebbe's path and method in Avodas Hashem began spreading and became more popular. And people saw this whole unique path that was never revealed before. And it really spoke to them. As you'll see when we start learning it, it'll really speak to you too, hopefully. The number of people that wanted private audiences with the Alter Rebbe became too much for him to handle. And so he said, you know what, I'm going to, because what he found was that people were coming to him with the exact same issues. And the issues were, I want to be a better Jew. I want to be more connected to Hashem. And I'm striving and I'm trying, but I'm constantly battling my inner demons. I'm constantly battling my inner anger, taiva, selfishness, whatever it may be. And even when I strive to work and I improve it for a little bit of time, I'm constantly re-engaging that battle. And how can I overcome it? How can I overcome my inner demons and serve Hashem and reach my greatest potential? These were the questions that they were asking the Alter Rebbe over and over again. And the Alter Rebbe decided, you know what, I'm going to write this down in a systematic path that will be applicable for everybody. And the Alter Rebbe wrote it down, and he asked those Hasidim who knew it better to teach those who didn't. And that's where the Sefer came from. Okay. So he says here, let's just learn this first paragraph here. Melukit mepi sforim umepi sofrim kadoshi elyon. The Alter Rebbe says, I compiled this. In his humility, the Alter Rebbe says, I'm not bringing anything new here to the table, even though he clearly is bringing something new to the table. In his humility, the Alter Rebbe says, I'm just compiling this from mepi sforim umepi sofrim kadoshi elyon, from holy books, which the tradition is that the Alter Rebbe is referring to the Maharal of Prague, the Shnei Luchos Habris, and then Mepi Sofri Kadoshi Elyon, from the sages and the holy Kadoshi Elyon, from the great tzaddikim. And here the Alter Rebbe is referring to his teachers, the Maggid of Mezrich and the Baal Shem Tov. Miyusid al HaPasik. And this entire path, this entire sefer, and this entire path of Avodas Hashem is based on a pasuk in Sefer Devarim, in Parshas Nitzavim. And the pasuk says, Ki karev elecha hadavra ma'ed. Moshe Rabbeinu, in his final address to the Jewish people, before he passes on, Moshe Rabbeinu tells them, Ki karev elecha hadavra ma'ed. This that I have given you is karev elecha. It is absolutely attainable. The Torah that you have been given is totally attainable for all of you. Not only is it attainable, it's karev elecha hadavra ma'ed. It's very obtainable. You can achieve this. Beficha ulavavcha la'asaysai. You could achieve this both in transforming beficha, your speech, belavavcha, your hearts, your inner thoughts, la'asaysai, and your actions. So Moshe Rabbeinu is telling the Jewish people. Now, all the commentaries on that pasuk say, what is Moshe Rabbeinu saying? What is Karev Elecha Davar Ma'od? Is it talking about a certain mitzvah? Is it talking about tshuva? Is it talking about the entire Torah? Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't say what's Karev Elecha Davar Ma'od. He just says this is absolutely Karev Elecha. This is obtainable to all of you. You can achieve this. Achieve what? The Alter Rebbe says what Moshe Rabbeinu is telling them is to achieve self-refinement, to achieve utilizing Torah, to achieve your ultimate fullest potential. It's karev elecha. It's absolutely possible. So levayir heitiv. So I am going to explain in this sefer, says the Alter Rebbe, echu karev ma'od. How is it obtainable? How can I reach my spiritual potential? How could I reach my fruition? How could I really transform myself? How can I not just simply observe Torah and mitzvahs, but actually have that observance completely be self-transforming so that I become the best version of myself, the best husband, the best Jew, the best human being, the best father? How can I do this? I'm going to explain this, says the Alter Rebbe, Echu Karev Ma'od, how this is not just Karev, but Karev Ma'od. It's very attainable. B'derech arucha v'ketzara be'ezras Hashem. And this is the long, but I'm going to use the longer, shorter way, says the Alter Rebbe. So I'm forewarning you now. There's no shortcuts to this. Is absolutely attainable. It's achievable. You can absolutely achieve self-transformation no matter where you are or at what stage of connection to Hashem you may be in. But you have to be aware it's arucha katsara. It's not, there's no shortcuts. I'm going to give you the path, and if you follow the path, it's absolutely doable. And you will see life changes, transformational life changes if you follow this path. But there is no shortcut. And the Alter Rebbe ends be'ezras Hashem Yisborech, which has a dual meaning. On one hand, the simplest meaning is the Alter Rebbe is saying, I'm going to explain this be'ezras Hashem, like we all say, I'm going to do this be'ezras Hashem with the help of Hashem. But there's a deeper meaning here, that when a Jew engages in real work and effort in transforming themselves, you're not doing it alone. You're doing it be'ezras Hashem Yisborech. That we need to know, and the Alter Rebbe is telling us here, even though this is derech arucha v'katzara, and it may seem overwhelming, and when you get into the weeds of actually learning it, it sometimes feels overwhelming. Like this is a long path, and I don't know if I can accomplish this. The Alter Rebbe is telling us right now in the very forefront, you can absolutely accomplish it, and you should know if you feel overwhelmed or you feel like this is beyond me. You're not doing this alone. As the Gemara says about Yom Kippur, Haba l'tayr Messiah Nesai, that if a Jew comes to be matayr themselves, to purify themselves, to rectify themselves, to refine themselves, Messiah Nesai, Hashem helps them, Hashem assists them. And so what Alter Rebbe says, if you engage in this path, you will not be engaging in it alone. You will be engaging in it be'ezras Hashem Yisborech. So Amir Hashem, next week, we're going to actually start chapter 1 and begin the path and the journey of real, absolute self-transformation. So that when we're all sitting here, I don't know, how long does it take to finish the Tanya, however long it takes, next year, however long it takes, we will all sit here and we will all ultimately reach the goal of being like Rachel Feld. Total self-transformation. That is our goal. Okay, so Amir Hashem, next week, chapter.
Just want to say a quick something. I'm sorry, talking about Rachel Feld. She is doing